My name is Justin Hewins. I'm a partner at CORA Capital. Thank you for joining us for the March edition of CORA College. Guest today is Ryan Bertrand from Transamerica. He will be presenting on three key decisions when considering retirement. Ryan is the head of Transamerica's Advanced Market Group and provides subject matter expertise on topics that include estate planning, taxation, retirement plans, charitable giving, and investments. Thanks for being here, Ryan.
Absolutely. Thanks for having me, Justin. My name is Ryan Bertrand. I head up the Advanced Markets Department at Transamerica. Our role is to provide subject matter expertise on all things retirement planning. And when we see that there are 12,000 baby boomers turning 65 every single day, there are very important decisions that we all have to make as it pertains to our retirement when the time comes. When the time comes, making those decisions oftentimes lasts a long time. It's irrevocable, and we have to make sure that when we make those decisions that they're done with the right type of diligence, thought, and done properly. Because failure to do an adequate job at selecting the right Social Security filing strategy, the right healthcare setup can have ripple effects as it pertains to your quality of life and your financial well being in retirement. So it's really worthwhile to give some thought to these decisions. And if you keep going down to the next slide, the real issue is that many people misunderstand their life expectancy. It's vastly underestimated how long people think that they're going to live. And I think it's interesting. You look at the life expectancy in today's terms relative to what it was back in 1918. 1918 life expectancy was 47 years old. Now, of course, you think of 47-year-olds today, and they're nowhere near the end of their lifetime. In fact, people that are 65 could very easily live 20, 30, 40 years in retirement, and we continue to push out the horizon as far as what longevity could be. And you see the little cute baby in the Time Magazine issue from February of 2015, and the proclamation in this Time Magazine issue was that this baby was born alive today and that they are going to live to age 142. Not to be outdone, the very next week, the Wall Street Journal, they said that 142 was not long enough, that in fact, there's someone on planet Earth today that's going to live to age 150. And there's actually a Palo Alto professor, a guy by the name of Stuart Kim, who Ivy League professor maintains that there's someone alive today that's going to live to 200. Now, of course, I'm not going to suggest that you're going to live to 142, 150, or 200, but certainly 90s or even breaking the century mark is not out of the picture for most people. In fact, that is one of the risks that we have to plan for. How old has the oldest person ever to record it have been? The oldest validated person to ever have lived out of France. Her name was Jean Calment, and she lived to the age of 122. Interesting thing about her is by the time she passed away, there was a contingent that felt that in fact it wasn't Jean Calment that made it to age 122, that it was in fact her daughter masquerading as her to continue to get her checks. A lot of people thought that she passed away in her 90s. So there's even some scrutiny as to whether or not we've ever had someone make it to age 122. But the interesting thing about that is it foreshadows some of the issues that we run into, especially with retirees. Fraud is pervasive. And in fact, there is an individual who was perpetrated against several years ago. He lived to age 112, and his name was Richard Overton. He actually was out of Austin, Texas, and he had kind of an interesting retirement plan because what happened to him was one of the worst case scenarios. He had someone steal his identity. They got a hold of his bank accounts. They rifled through every dime that he had. And what ended up happening is the community in Austin, Texas, thankfully rallied around Mr. Overton, and they were able to set up a GoFundMe page. And in that GoFundMe page, they funded $453,000 so he could continue his independence in retirement. Because what's lost in a lot of these conversations around longevity is how expensive it actually is to live to these advanced ages. Mr. Overton was spending $15,000 per month, $180,000 per year just to stay in his house. So we have to make decisions as we're moving into retirement, and making sure that we're sound financially has lasting implications on how we're living going forward. Scroll down to the next slide, please. And it does go beyond what we generally consider when we think about finance. I think the saving aspect of financial planning is very different than the things you contend with as you head into retirement. So when you set up a 401k and you do all your investments, these are all really important things to make sure that you've accumulated enough wealth. We can't overstate enough how important the science behind financial planning and investing is. But also, we have to recognize that as you go into retirement, and if you'd please scroll down to the next slide, there's an altogether different set of complicating factors that we have to consider. Because as you're living that last segment of your life and you're in retirement, you have to think about all these things. How do I want to live my life? How do I going to file my Social Security strategy? How does that impact my family? How does that impact my spouse? Also, what about Medicare when I file for my healthcare expenses? Also, things like hospice planning, estate planning, incapacity planning, all these different things have to be thought about to ensure that we're living the way that we want in retirement. Scroll down. And this presentation goes over some of the key decisions that we have to make that are essential to driving the best possible outcome over that 30 or 40-year potential window. So filing for Social Security is a big one. And what we find is when people file for their Social Security, oftentimes they do so with very little thought. And the primary reason that they may file for a Social Security strategy at a given time is because the money was there. The money's there, they can get a check. There's lasting impact on the amount of the check that they collect when they collect because they just took it early. Also, healthcare expenses. This is a major fear in retirement. People don't want to contend with thinking about having that one crazy event that changes not only their quality of life from a health standpoint going forward, but it can be catastrophic financially. And then finally, making sure that we're aging the way that we want and the quality of life that we envision for our retirement is also an important aspect of this. Please scroll down to the next slide. So the first area is Social Security. And you're going to see a really happy group of ladies on the slide. So Social Security is one of the most important decisions you're going to make in your retirement life. You think about retirement, a lot of people probably don't consider themselves retired until they're actually filing and collecting a Social Security check. It is the one factor in retirement that probably dictates whether or not you consider yourself retired. The unfortunate aspect of this, though, is that time and time again, people make mistakes when they file for Social Security, and those mistakes mean that you leave money on the table. There was a great study done by United Planners on this very issue, and they looked at the percent of people who file an optimal Social Security filing strategy, and what they found was abysmal. Americans are not very good at putting a lot of thought in executing their Social Security filing strategy. And what that means is that only 4% of individuals, according to United Planners, actually file an optimal strategy. Kind of a weird statistic, though, when you think about it. What does 4% actually mean? Well, certainly 96% aren't filing an optimal strategy, but what is optimal? That's going to change person to person. But they take it a step further and they actually looked at the dollar amount that people are leaving on the table when they don't file an optimal strategy. And they looked at this nationally and they estimated that equates to $3.4 trillion of lost retirement income as a collective group. Now, on a household basis, the number is equally as startling because what they found is just by not taking the time to run the numbers, and that's the sin behind all of this. Social Security is so easy. Technology has taken the guesswork out. We can punch some numbers into a computer program, and it will tell you exactly what you should do to file an optimal strategy and to get the most cumulative out of the system. But they found that this deficiency in taking that exercise and not filing optimally costs the average household $111,000 of lifetime retirement income. That's a substantial amount. That's worthwhile taking that 30 or 60 minutes that it would take to go through, run the analysis, and understand the decision and how it impacts your financial security going forward. Next slide down, please. And George Foreman, he says it best, it's not the age when I want to retire, it's at what income. And that's really the best way to think about Social Security. The age at which you collect your Social Security check dictates how much you get. And you have several options. The earliest option for Social Security retirement income is age 62. There's also terminology that comes into play when we talk about Social Security. One of the most important terms you'll ever hear for Social Security is something called full retirement age. That's the age at which you get what they call your primary insurance amount. That primary insurance amount dictates how much you get if you take it early or if you delay until later. If you do decide to delay until later, there's an incentive. They give you an 8% delayed retirement credit on top of your full retirement age PIA. So there's an incentive to wait. Now, the key in the planning, though, and where a lot of people overlook, is that also has impact on spouses because the survivor benefit includes that 8% delayed retirement credit. So a lot of the calculus behind Social Security planning strategies focus on the spouses and how they file in tandem with each other to maximize that 8% delayed retirement credit. Now, unfortunately, what we find is when people have questions around Social Security, it's really difficult to get a lot of answers. It is exceedingly more complex than many of us think. And if you don't agree with me, run out to the Social Security website, pull up their manual, which actually was made public by the Freedom of Information Act, and just try and read through some of the pages on there. It's almost like reading Greek, it's so complicated. However, it's very important to get the best advice around this. And a lot of people end up turning to the Social Security Administration, which is fine. You can get great advice from them. But one of the things when we do this presentation live is we'll ask the audience if they've ever called the Social Security Administration and if they had a good or a bad experience. And it's very rare where I have someone raise their hand and said that they had a great experience talking to SSA. Generally, what I find is you wait on hold for a while. There's actually one individual who was a financial advisor. He called Social Security, had a complicated situation because it was his own benefit, ended up waiting on hold for 8 hours, finally got through, and the Social Security rep hung up on him. So he had to call back in after waiting for 8 hours. Now, again, you have great financial professionals that can help wade through this. You have technology that can make this decision really easy. And it's not so much whether or not you actually execute what the computer program says. It's just you go into the whole exercise with your eyes wide open. Because if you don't know how to do it and you just make the willy-nilly choice to claim at age 62, that comes with a reduction. And the reduction, if you claim at age 62, because full retirement age right now is at age 67, which is ironic. You think about this change in our retirement age. It's always interesting to hear politicians talk about Social Security during a presidential election cycle, because this is where all the ideas come out on how they're going to fix the system. And actually, that was one of the fixes in the system. Now, ask yourself when you thought they put that change in, because full retirement age moved up to age 67 and it ceased to go up further in 2022. That was a change that was put in place back in 1983. So it does take time to change the Social Security system. It's one of those things where some people do claim early because of the potential for solvency issues, but I wouldn't let that be the end all be all, because even in the worst forecasts, according to the Social Security Administration, still 80% of benefits when the money runs out is continued to be projected to pay by incoming payroll. So it's still something that I wouldn't let that be the end all be all as far as your filing strategy, because the bulk of benefits, even under the worst situation, still continues to pay. But you do claim at age 62, you get a 30% benefit if you're 62 this year, reduction in benefit for not only you, but when you pass away, that reduction also impacts a survivor benefit to your spouse. So bottom line, when it comes to Social Security optimization, the golden rule, it's very hard to find golden rules in finance. This is one that tends to be right most of the time. Protect the higher earner's benefit if you're looking to get the most cumulative out of the system, and have that person defer until age 70. Because if they defer until age 70 and you have a long life, and I think that's an important thought, you will get more out of the system. Scroll down a little bit to the next slide. We always have people, though, that regret the decision. They claimed at age 62. They realized when they took at age 62, they may have penalized their spouse and had a smaller survivor benefit because they took early and didn't wait until age 70. If that ever is a situation, there actually are ways that you can salvage that benefit. There's a couple of strategies that can be employed. A lot of people think you claim at age 62 and it's a permanent thing. Not necessarily. You have these two conduits that you can fix your benefit if you're in that situation. The first is called the payback. And the payback is pretty self-explanatory. It does exactly what it says it does. You take every benefit that Social Security paid you and you pay them back. So that entails writing a check. And as long as you do that within 12 months of filing for your own benefit, its technical name for it is called a withdrawal of application. They pretend like you never filed for your Social Security benefits, and you can file later on down the road if you want. Now, the pitfalls to it is, one, you're paying money back to Social Security, and then also you're foregoing retirement income until you claim later on from Social Security. So your check stops until you turn it back on. But that can be a great way to fix a benefit if you find you don't need the money within that 12 months, or maybe you find that the survivor spouse benefit and having that higher amount for your loved one is more important to you. That can be a good fit. The next one is for people that didn't act within 12 months, because that invariably happens. It's, oh, I filed 2 years ago and I've claimed early and I still want to change my filing strategies, or anything that I can do. There actually is the start, stop, start. And what that entails is once you start your Social Security benefit, let's say you claimed at age 62, you actually cannot turn it off until you hit your full retirement age. When you hit your full retirement age, you're presented with an option. This option is called suspension of benefits, and that's where the stop is. You suspend your benefit at that point. You hit full retirement age, you say, I no longer want the checks. They'll stop sending them to you. And what comes back between your full retirement age and age 70 is that 8% delayed retirement credit. And that will start building up the reduced benefit. Now, the disadvantage to this strategy is once you do suspend benefits, not only does your check stop, but if your spouse was filing under your record, they will no longer get benefits either. So it can be disadvantageous if you have other people claiming off of your record or you need that income. But it does constitute an ability for you to salvage a benefit, to get some growth onto that reduced amount. And mathematically, you'll be close to what you would have received at full retirement age. And that would be the amount that your surviving spouse gets as the survivor benefit. And generally, these two strategies, when I see them employed, the two times that people really use them is one, to protect the spouse, and two, there's been a change in their situation. Maybe they went back to work. They don't need the money anymore, because that's also a factor that we have to consider when claiming for benefits. If you could scroll down a little bit, please, to the next slide. Because there are other factors as well. And work is one. So if you're working prior to your full retirement age, they actually withhold benefits from your check. And the thresholds are very low. And we actually do see people go in, claim at age 62, continue to work, earn a reasonable amount of money, and come to find that they're not getting a check. The reason being is that they're getting withholding of benefits. Once you hit full retirement age, you could earn as much money as you want, and it never impacts or reduces your benefit. But prior to full retirement age, work will reduce your benefit. So if you are earning a large amount of money, it may be better just to wait till full retirement age because of that factor. Now, if you do have that situation and you have that withholding of benefits, they recalculate your benefit when you hit your full retirement age. So you will recoup that money back over time. Also, family situation. Family situation and personal circumstance probably are the two most important things in filing for Social Security benefits. Now, longevity certainly plays a factor in this, but so does family. And I remember one presentation we gave. It was in Southern California. There was a guy that showed up. We were there an hour early. He showed up 45 minutes early. And usually when someone shows up 45 minutes early, it means that they have a problem in their situation. And that's exactly what he had. What he had was a Parkinson's disease diagnosis. Now, he was still working, and his doctor had given him the disability. So he was considering retiring, going on to Social Security disability, and was wondering if that was a good idea or not. Now, one interesting thing, and we see this a lot, is he was Social Security age. He was 60 years old. So disability allows you to claim your Social Security benefit early, but he had two children that were in high school. Now, anytime you're collecting off of Social Security and you have children under the age of 18, they're eligible for a Social Security benefit just like a spouse is. So by claiming early, he opened up a benefit for his two kids and a benefit for his spouse. So the math in his personal circumstance actually said that it was better to take that disability benefit now to open up the ancillary benefits. And if he wouldn't have come and listened to the information or give it some thought, he would have missed out when we ran the calculation on $93,000 of income. That's a sizable amount. That meant a difference to that individual. So it's certainly something worth thinking about. Now, if you scroll down a little bit more, longevity also is a huge one. And I think health is a huge one. So is marital status. So again, we gave some thought into delaying the higher earner's benefit to protect that larger spouse's benefit, because the longer that benefit grows and continues to pay out over two lives, the more mathematically accumulate. But sometimes the reverse is true. And this strikes close to home because I remember my uncle, when he turned age 62, he came up to me and he said, "Oh, I know you do something in finance and you understand Social Security. Should I claim at age 62? And I told him beyond a shadow of a doubt, given his personal circumstance, he should claim at age 62 because he was the fun uncle. He was a party animal. He was in poor health all the time because of his lifestyle. He passed away at 66. So you think about the conventional wisdom of deferring until age 70. Had he done that and just taken the normal consideration and not taken into consideration his health and lifestyle, he wouldn't have received a dime from Social Security. So definitely his circumstance said take at age 62. Scroll down a little bit because we can take the math and we can look at this and determine what are the break-even points in Social Security filing strategy. So if you have a full retirement age of 66 and you defer until age 70, cumulatively, assuming you live past 82 and a half, you will get more out of the system have you deferred until age 70. That's that steep line. You'll see it accumulates faster because you have a larger benefit, but you have to live beyond that age in order for it to come out on a positive perspective. Now, also, I think what this chart doesn't show, and I think this would even beg the question as to whether or not you should claim at age 70 as well, is it doesn't include the joint life. Because you include that spouse in this math, and the number becomes even more compelling to delay until age 70. Scroll down to the next slide. So, in summary, just taking a look at your information, getting your social security statement, determining how the benefit fits into your personal situation, certainly when you take it does have a bearing on everything, and determining when to take it is extremely important because it lasts as long as you do. Making that mistake early on can be problematic if you don't know the ways to fix it, and does cascade down not just to yourself, but if you're married, to your spouse, potentially if you're the higher earner in the equation. Scroll down to the next slide. And then the other part to this, and I think it's important when we're thinking about Social Security, don't just think about Social Security, you have to think about Social Security and Medicare, because you're making the healthcare decision at the same time that you're filing for Social Security, or relatively in the same proximity of when you're making that decision. Because if you're retired and you're 65, you have to enroll in Medicare within 7 months of your birthday, say 3 months prior, 3 months post, and then the month of your birth, you have to enroll in Medicare. And if you don't enroll in Medicare, you'll get a penalty against your Part B premiums. Now, the reason I say it's important to think about the two together is most people, when they pay their Medicare Part B premiums, they're paying it out of their Social Security check. Also, Social Security runs Medicare. HMS is part of the Social Security system. Also, if you're signed up for Social Security, you are automatically enrolled in Medicare if you don't have creditable coverage. And then finally, if you're in Social Security and you go on Medicare, you actually get some insulation on your Part B premium increases. There's an interchange between the Social Security cost of living adjustment and the Medicare increase if you're in the lower bands of IRMA, which is a income-based healthcare premium system that Medicare puts on. It can provide some insulation for people in that lower IRMA bracket. So there's a lot of interchange between Social Security and Medicare, and they're a decision that should be made as a package, not in isolation. Keep scrolling down. And I think this quote by Walter Cronkite is a great one. America's healthcare system is neither healthy, caring, nor a system. I think there's some truth to that. Sometimes when we make these Medicare decisions, we don't understand what we're doing, because Medicare, when it was launched back in 1965, wasn't supposed to cover 100% of your medical costs. It was supposed to cover 51%. As the system has changed over time, they've added in some complexities, some additional coverages, so that retirees have a robust option of their healthcare in retirement. But with that comes some responsibility. As you make the system more complicated, there are decisions that you need to understand. And in my experience, a lot of times people don't understand the decisions or why they're making one decision over another when it comes to their Medicare filing strategy. Scroll down. And healthcare is continually one of the biggest issues for retirees. You can read every survey that I've ever read in my over 20 years in this industry, and the number one and number two concerns of retirees are always the same. It's always fear of running out of money, which recently in a survey was a larger fear than the fear of death. Also, healthcare costs. Those are always number one and number two. Healthcare costs freak people out because they're catastrophic, and we have sticker shock. We generally hear these stories and have experience about how much healthcare costs. Had twins a year ago. My twins are turning 1 April 4th. We just got the bill for when we were in the hospital and my wife gave birth to our twins. $92,000 for that hospital stay. And it's not just that. There's a coworker of mine whose son, he went into the hospital because he had the flu. This was pre-pandemic. So he went in, had a high fever. They go in, they give him an IV. Turns out that IV was the only thing they could do for him. They sent him home after 4 hours. He was raving about how great the hospital waiting room was. It has a fireplace. It was really nice. Gets the bill, $12,000. They didn't do anything but deliver an IV, and he sat in the waiting room, and it cost $12,000. Now, of course, insurance pays a lot of that, but we all understand and we all have ingrained in us this sticker shock about the cost of medicine and the cost of pharmaceuticals. You look at the cost for a 65-year-old projected out, and this is inflation adjusted, $673 for a 65-year-old couple on medical expenses. Inflation for medicine and healthcare has always been higher than the nominal consumer price index increase of inflation, 5.4%. And that's supposed to continue on. So this is something that we have ingrained in us. But I think really, when you think about it, as long as you're enrolling on time, you're getting the right coverage, this shouldn't scare you. It should be one of those things where we budget for it, we do it the right way. We can go a long way in alleviating a lot of this cost. And most people, even though this number is eye popping, they actually never pay for it out of pocket because it's a lot of it is coming out of their social security check. So it's just a matter of making sure we have everything covered. Scroll down. Some of the other important decisions that we have in retirement are the enrolling part. So enrolling, we have the window of when to enroll, and this confuses people a lot. And this is dictated by whether or not you or your spouse work. So if you and your spouse don't work and you're turning age 65, this is your initial enrollment for Medicare. You're going to sign up for Medicare and you're going to determine what type of Medicare that you want. Now, for a lot of people, 65, they're going to want to continue to work past age 65. And if you or your spouse have creditable coverage and that coverage encapsulates both you and your spouse, you don't have to worry about this window. Once you lose that coverage, you then have a different enrollment period, 8 months after losing that coverage, to sign up for Medicare. So even the way that you're getting your health care prior to retiring actually weighs into how you're going to enroll in Medicare. So again, what you're seeing on the screen, this is for people who aren't working and turning age 65. This is when they have to sign up for Medicare. You're working, you or your spouse, and you have that creditable coverage, and they'll give you a notice. You'll get a notice from your employer every year saying notice of creditable coverage. If you get that and you're still working, that's your ticket to not have to sign up until you lose that coverage. That's when that 8-month window opens, and then you'll select your Medicare. Scroll down to the next slide, please. So it's not automatic, and it doesn't cover your family. So oftentimes what we'll see is the one of the working spouses, and actually this is my parents. My father, older than my mother, he turned age 65. He was no longer working. He went on Medicare, and my mom lost Medicare coverage because she's younger than my dad. So that meant that my mom had to go up and sign for Medicare because of the disjointing in ages. And that's something very common that we see. Older spouse retires, younger spouse who may not be working no longer has coverage. They have to go sign up. So important thing when we're talking about this is it's not automatic, and the family equation does come into play. It's unlike any other system in our retirement. Social Security has a spousal aspect to it. Your 401k, if you want to name someone other than your spouse, you need to get your spouse to sign off on it. But with Medicare, you turn age 65, you're not working, you're no longer able to cover your spouse. Medicare doesn't cover a younger spouse. They have to sign up for it when they hit that age. Or if you have credible coverage to your employer, they don't have to sign up. But otherwise, that's one of the big issues that we see is people losing coverage for the younger non-working spouse. Next slide, please. And also, it doesn't cover everything. Probably the big one is people conflate Medicaid and Medicare. Medicaid is long-term care for people of need. So you have to be financially destitute. There's assets and income levels to qualify for Medicaid. Medicare does not provide any long-term care services whatsoever. Also, it doesn't cover some things that you would think would be medically necessary. Things like hearing aids, dental, acupuncture. Services in foreign countries has actually gone up in recent years. It's not as hard to get that covered through Medicare as it used to, but the decisions you make going into Medicare, even within the United States, may dictate what coverage options that you have. So filling in the gaps and making sure that we have these items that aren't included in the standard vanilla flavor of Medicare become one of the goals of the planning that we do here. And if you go down to the next slide, the broad option that you have is the flavor of Medicare that you want. And this is one of the most glossed over decisions. And people have preconceived notions when they make this decision. So you have two broad options. The top line, that's called Original Medicare. Original Medicare is Part A, which is hospital insurance. Part B, which is very akin to what you would think about what you use when you go into the doctor. And then Part D is prescription drug. That's an option, but conceivably for people when they go into Part D, you're signing up for that. You're getting prescription drug coverage because your possibility of needing prescription drugs over your retirement is very high. If you don't sign up for it initially, you do get a penalty. And then Medigap, that fills in all the other things that you don't have covered through the rest of the bubbles there. So that's the top line. Sometimes people will say, I don't want to sign up for Original Medicare because I don't want to have anything that's government provided. I would rather go on Medicare Advantage. And that's the bubble below. Medicare Advantage is provided by private insurance companies. Now, Medicare Advantage encapsulates all of those items that we saw in Original Medicare, but that's probably the worst way to make the decision. by saying, yeah, I don't want it because it's not government provided, it's provided by insurance company. Or the opposite, we see sometimes people say, I hate insurance companies and I don't want to be on Medicare Advantage. I'd rather go on original Medicare. There are quirks about each one of these options that may push you to one over the other. And I think oftentimes they're much more substantive than making the decision based on whether it's provided by an insurance company or the government. Because quite honestly, both of these options, they have attributes that are provided by insurance companies and they have attributes that are governed and dictated by the government. So you're getting both, whether you want it or not. When you're using Medicare Advantage, they set what's in the Advantage plan. You still have to pay your Part B premium. You're doing original Medicare, Medicare Part D, Medigap, they're provided by private insurance companies. So making it based on that one criteria, which a lot of people do, is a big mistake because there are more important elements. Slide down, please. Cost is a big one. Now, when you look at Medicare plans, and this is another way to look at it, you're looking at the different alignments of Part C, which is Advantage, versus original Medicare. I think when you think about Advantage plans, just think about it the one-stop shop. It's provided as an option for an alternative to original Medicare for both convenience, but also for cost. Slide down, please. The cost is the biggest aspect for a lot of people, and it is an important one. And what you can see is Medicare Advantage plans, by and large, are cheaper than original Medicare plans. It doesn't necessarily mean that that's the variable for you. Just because it's cheaper doesn't necessarily mean it's better. And also, oftentimes, people misunderstand the way that these are priced. You still pay your Part B premium when you go into an Advantage plan. And the way that they're priced, sometimes you'll go on the site and you'll run the plan and it'll say $0. You're paying zero for it. That's not really true. You're still paying your Part B premium, but you're not paying anything over and above that. But if cost is your major criteria, maybe you have great health and you always will, that might lend you towards Medicare Advantage as opposed to original Medicare. But there are other aspects that may tilt you towards original Medicare. Next slide, please. And I think when you start to think about Medicare Advantage and what it actually is, it can help you kind of get an idea as to what it looks like in the private market. So Medicare Advantage plans are always either HMOs or PPOs. Where this becomes important is in your lifestyle. So a lot of people I talk to in retirement, their primary concern is travel. They want to travel, they want to go see the world, they want to visit their grandkids across the country on a regular basis. If you are attracted to Medicare Advantage and you do plan to travel a lot, it's not a bad idea to see where that Medicare Advantage plan is accepted. Because your Medicare Advantage plan, sometimes when you think of HMOs or PPOs, those are networks of doctors and they can be regional. So you may be able to get that where you live, but then you go across country and then you find yourself needing a medical service and all of a sudden you're out of network and your costs are a lot higher. Original Medicare is accepted by most doctors across the United States. Like by most, I mean about 99% of them. You're going to be able to get an original Medicare service from any doctor anywhere. So for travel, oftentimes people will say, go on original Medicare because it's easier to get coverage across the country. But again, when you look at Advantage plans, it's only as good as its network. And I think that's the best way to evaluate them because there are national networks across the country where you can get services, just making sure if you are traveling that it's not a very small enclosed Advantage HMO or PPO, but that kind of gives you an idea of what you're dealing with original Medicare versus Medicare Advantage plans. Next slide, please. Also, long-term care. So long-term care is something you have to take out of the equation when we're talking about Medicare because Medicare doesn't cover long-term care. And long-term care is extraordinarily expensive. You look at the cost of long-term care, and the only commodity that I can see that looks very similar to it is an Ivy League education. It's that expensive because we look at how long people generally need long-term care. And according to HMS, it's 3 to 4 years, and 60 to 70% of 65-year-olds will need it that long. So the only thing I look at that has that duration is a 4-year college education. You also look at the cost of a semi-private nursing home room, and we're talking $100,000 in 2023. And you're sharing a room with somebody. You look at the most expensive college. So think about it. What do you think the most expensive college is? Most people have never heard of it. And depending on which survey you read, it does change. But over the last few years, the most expensive one by consensus is Harvey Mudd College out in Southern California. And that's going to run you over $80,000 per year. So that's $20,000 cheaper than a semi-private nursing home room. Very few people will ever ever have an Ivy League education or have an expense annually in a college over 80,000. But yet 60% of 65-year-olds are going to need long-term care for 3 or 4 years, and they've done no saving for it or no consideration for it. That's not one of those things to freak out over either. It's just making sure you segment money for it, that you have other avenues to make sure long-term care costs are considered, and having the ear of a financial professional to lead you towards the right solutions for you can go all the way in making sure that you have those things taken into consideration. But it's one of those areas where it can be very expensive. And I think when we're thinking about our children and our parents, they don't want to be a burden to their children, and children want to make sure their parents are taken care of. And there's a big aspect of this to make sure that we have the care that we want when we're going through it. And it does take some foresight and planning to ensure that we have what we want already in place and have it before we actually need it, because the people that need it, they can never get it. Next slide, please. So in closing with healthcare and retirement, it is a big cost. Keep going. And it's just making sure that we budget for things, that we discuss it, that we explore our options, and that we make sure we enroll on time. Just for a lot of people, the biggest thing is just making sure we don't miss those deadlines, ended up with higher premiums than we have to. Also, those IRMA brackets that we talked about for Medicare. We didn't have the table in this presentation, but making sure that you're controlling your income and not having spikes because your income in retirement dictates how much you actually spend on Medicare costs. That's another aspect of this that can't be overlooked. Next slide, please. What we'll close up with is aging, and I'll go through the aging section relatively quickly, just in the terms of time, and I know we got a late start on this. Aging is something we all have to think about, and sometimes they're uncomfortable conversations, and they're things that we do have to do. I think anytime someone has a change in their life situation, these are the things they need to think about, and it's not necessarily age dependent. So when we had our twins last year, first thing we did is we updated our estate plan, and that helps me sleep a lot better at night. You update your estate plan, you make sure you have the right directives in place, and a lot of this takes care of itself. It took us a half hour. It was really easy to do. It's easier to do than it ever has been. But I think for people in retirement, you start to realize that you're not immortal and that this stuff has to be taken into consideration, and that a lot of it does play out during life. You do end up in that nursing home situation. You end up in an incapacitation event. The way that you've prepared for it dictates how you go through it. Scroll down, please. It's an issue of mind over matter. If you don't mind, it doesn't matter. It's kind of interesting. Our compliance department, you'll notice a little thing. Mark Twain is not affiliated, endorsed, or sponsored by Transamerica. We actually literally had to put that in there, even though he's been dead since the 1800s. Keep scrolling down. And it's about having a plan. We put this together with MIT Age Lab out in Boston, Massachusetts. And I think it's very intuitive. But the one I want you to center in on, just in the purposes of time, is intentions. When we talk about aging, intentions are a big part of this. Who do you want to take care of you if something bad happens? And again, it's not necessarily age dependent. So everyone should consider powers of attorney. Have you drafted legal directives that allow someone to step in and run your finances if necessary? Have you given some thought, if you do have that, is that person trustworthy? We see a lot of plans blow up because the wrong person was provided the ability to be either the power of attorney, the trustee, the executor. They didn't have the financial wherewithal to do it. So giving some thought to this and making sure the right person is doing that drives the best possible outcome. But it's all driven by intentions. All those other things, it's all about the intentions, about preparing for catastrophic conditions and chronic conditions. If you scroll down, and this is just all common sense stuff, and cognitive decline is a big part of this. Cognitive decline is something that skyrockets as you get older. 1 in 9, age 65 or older, have an Alzheimer's or dementia diagnosis. 1 in 3 by the time you're age 85. So making sure that you've given some thought to this, and it's not just cognitive decline. It could be a stroke, could be a heart attack, could be anything that incapacitates you. This is where you put some thought into that planning, and the quality behind it dictates your outcome. Keep scrolling down, please. Alzheimer's and dementia is a big one, but really the bottom 3 pieces there are what you should focus in on. These are the essential documents that people need in their estate plan. Wills, no brainer. Everyone should have a will, it should be monitored, it should be set up properly. Advanced directives, that's the medical directives, how you want your care provided if something bad happens to you. And then POAs, which are both medical and financial, and make sure they're updated and monitored on a regular basis. One of the things that drives people crazy is they'll have advanced directives and POAs, and they'll have them expire because they haven't updated them within 10 years. And they submit them and try to get them put into force. And there's some arbitrary policy at some companies or financial institutions that say that they won't honor them if they're not updated. So be sure to update them periodically if you do have them. I always say put it on your annual review checklist. It's one of those things that's very easy to do. You're just changing the date. All of a sudden, something bad happens to you. You don't have that added stress of trying to argue with someone about your legal documentation. Scroll down, please. POAs, lots of different types. Talk to an attorney, make sure that you're getting the right one for you. And then if something bad happens, like a death of a spouse, be prepared for it. Keep scrolling down. Because everything needs to be redone. And it's one of the biggest stressors when we go through retirement, death, and divorce. And there are individuals, financial professionals that can help if you ever have a loved one that go through this. And then finally, having an aging checklist. And this is where we create tools and resources to help wade through this a lot, but your financial professionals help here quite a bit. So communication, reviewing, monitoring, the laws change. If anyone's paid attention since the pandemic, we've had major law changes in the areas of retirement planning and Secure Act 1.0 and 2.0. If you haven't updated your plan since then, I would encourage you to talk to a professional to do so, because there's a very strong possibility, depending on how your plan is laid out, that it may be expired or not effective anymore because of the changes that occurred during those regulations. This constantly happens. There's always tax legislation. There's always something that comes out of left field that changes the playing field itself, and we need to adapt to it. And when we don't adapt to it, that causes issues for our family. Scroll down, and it takes someone at the center. This is where expertise, this is a very complicated area. And I know we talked through the last 45 minutes. I talked relatively fast. I didn't even scratch the surface. These are the essential things that we need to do. And having good team of financial professionals that are informed, that are watching your back as things changes, goes all the way in making sure that your family and yourself are safeguarded financially. And if something bad does happen to you, that you're prepared for it. And finally, thanks again. I'm glad everyone was able to stick around. I know we had a late start, so I appreciate everybody's patience. Thank you very much.
All right, Ryan, thank you very much. I appreciate it. We're going to skip the Q&A today because we did get a late start, and I do apologize for that, the technological difficulties that we had. If you do have any questions after the presentation or anything that you think about, please don't hesitate to reach out to us. We will certainly respond with any information that you request. So you have our contact information. We do have checklists and things for healthcare, retirement. So all that material can be provided if it's something that you're interested in. But other than that, thank you for joining us. Again, apologies for the late start, but we'll see you next time at the next CORA College event. Thank you.